and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and this is kind of an episode in reverse, Midge.
Reverse,
Um,
reverse.
reverse, exactly. So normally I would tell you about something, and then at the end I would be like, also, there are like shows or movies that are inspired by that.
Mm-hmm.
But today's episode is one in which the show has brought me to the topic.
Okay.
So as I mentioned in our year in review, I watched The Terror last year.
Yeah.
Have gotten actually some eager comments from folks. And I'm actually going to tell you about the real life expedition that inspired the show.
Okay, very cool.
Yes. So this is basic. This is a show about a historic doomed polar expedition. So I was already familiar with this before the show. As our listeners will know, I love a maritime disaster.
We do know that to be true,
We
yes.
do. But also, I love survival disaster like Mount Everest. And I feel like this is just like a handshake between those things
This is
with
your spooky sweet spot.
my spooky sweet spot with an extra serving of crazy Victorians, because this certainly did happen
Yeah.
in the Victorian times. Um,
Excellent.
so for this episode, I'm drawing on my own knowledge of it, plus a documentary called Arctic Tomb, a website called discoveringthearctic.org, which seems to be run by like UK research organizations, and the Royal Museum in Greenwich has a really nice page about it because they have a lot of the artifacts from this expedition. So
Nice.
this is going to be, I'll just let the folks know, this is a loose, high level overview. It was already getting so long, even trying
Sure.
to be high level. So I had to cut it back further. So we'll say it's a teaser if you're intrigued by this. There's a whole beautiful world of information about polar exploration you could get into. Uh, so let's do it. Before we jump in, we are going to say first and foremost that the original explorers and discoverers of anything in the Arctic are, of course, the Inuit and people who actually lived there.
Right.
So all of these places obviously had been explored by the people who were living there at the time. And what we're going to talk today are some wacky white people who showed up later to be like, wow, check this shit out.
I need you to know that when I was writing my episode for today's recording, I literally wrote in my notes that I think we need like a segment on this podcast that's called like surprise, it's colonization.
Right?
And,
Truly.
and this episode is going to sounds like fit into surprise, it's
Yeah,
colonization.
it's definitely within the themes there. So really, ever since Europeans realized that America existed, they've been like, wow, it kind of sucks that America's here and we can't just sail straight across to Asia. We would really like to just sail to Asia. So people were like, well, there must be a way to sail to Asia. And that way, one of those theorized ways was the Northwest Passage. So did you learn about this, Midge? I don't know if this is like a Great Lakes thing to learn about the Northwest Passage a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, that vaguely means something to me, but I wouldn't say that I remember in depth learning about that now.
Sure. Yeah, so it came up a lot in my schooling because I do live on Lake Michigan, and a lot of the Great Lakes were first navigated by people who were like, "Can we get through to Asia from here?" Spoiler alert, you cannot. So sorry about that, guys.
Save you the trip.
Save you the
cannot do
trip.
that.
But by the time we reach 1800, there has been a ton of exploration of North America, South America, and they have determined that there is not a passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific in like a temperate climate. So they're like, all right, we got to keep going further north. So in 1804, a man named John Barrow became secretary of the Admiralty, and he was all in on the Northwest Passage. He was just like, this is going to be my thing. we're going to find the passage, and it's going to be awesome trade, great glory for the empire, all that good stuff. So over 40 years, he sent 8 different expeditions to the Arctic to try and like go over the top of Canada and find the Northwest Passage. And obviously they kept learning more and more and getting a little bit farther and a little farther, but no one had done the thing yet. Um,
I just don't whatever that gene is, I don't have it.
no, no,
The idea of,
definitely
like,
not.
let's go into this completely unknown area and just see what happens,
Right?
and I'm
Just like, yeah.
excited to do it. Like, what?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And it's not often a pleasant thing, as we'll
No.
talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
But our story, our specific part of this story, begins in 1845. They filled in almost the entire map except for like one space of what I think I saw Wikipedia or somewhere say that it was like 70,000 square miles, where they're like, it's got to be here. And that was considered like much more narrow. And I'm like, that still seems like a large amount of space.
Yeah, like,
Um,
don't worry, guys, it's somewhere in the 70,000. Like,
don't worry.
also, we're on foot. Like,
Right. Yeah. Well, we're in boats most
well,
of
yeah,
it,
right, but
but we're attempting. Well, we'll see. So John Barrow's like, awesome. I know who should lead this expedition. William Perry, who has led the most successful attempt thus far at finding the passage. And Perry was like, you know what? Actually, I don't want to go back to the
period.
Arctic, which
And you
fair.
should and you should say it, William.
Right. So they're like, all right, that's fine. There's actually this other guy named James Clark Ross, and he's been to the Arctic a bunch. He also led an expedition to Antarctica. He'll be great. And he's like, guys, I actually just got married, and I promised my wife I wasn't going to go back to the Arctic.
Good man.
Which fair, good man, stands by it. Barrow's like, all right, what about this James Fitzjames guy? And the Navy's like, he's too young. And Barrow's like, okay, how about Francis Crozier? He was the second in command on that Ross expedition. And he's like, no, but so historically it says that he declined for reasons of modesty, which is weird because, spoiler alert, he does go on this expedition. So I'm like, I
Oh,
feel like maybe there was a weird extra vibe going on there. So finally, John Barrow's
modesty.
like, all right, John Franklin can do it.
Was it not a red flag to him when nobody wanted to go?
Right. Yeah.
I think if I asked, like, all these people who have done it before, they're like, "Yeah, hell yeah, I'm not going back ever." Like, I think
Right.
I'd be like, "Hmm,
Hmm.
interesting."
Yeah. So we're not going to do a deep dive on Franklin. It's fair to say that you'll find bad shit about lots of powerful British men of the period. I would not say he is an exception to that rule. He did have experience in the Arctic and had, gone on expeditions there. Unfortunately, one of those was leading an expedition where over half the men died, and people
Perfect.
starved, and they had to eat their own boots to survive. So he was like known in England as like the man who ate his own boots. So
How embarrassing.
super embarrassing. And he was also 59 at this time,
Oh, yeah,
which is
not a spring chicken for
pretty
Victorian.
old for rolling out
Yeah,
to the Arctic. Um,
yeah.
but he accepted the commission, and so they're like, sweet, we're gonna fit these 2 ships and we're gonna get ready for this. So the lead ship was Erebus, captained by him, with Fitzjames, who was just mentioned, who was too young, as the second in command.
Who you
And
said was named James
it
Fitzjames, correct?
is, yes.
Great. Just clocking that real quick.
Just clocking that. Very good clocking. And the second ship was called Terror. And that was Captain.
Oh,
Yep. So that is where it's from. They were actually called Terror and Erebus. Uh,
alrighty then.
I know we're like, gosh, getting the nominative determinism in
Yeah,
here
like,
early, you guys.
you guys ever heard of foreshadowing?
Yes. And Terror was captained by Crozier, who we said declined full command of the expedition. We'll see. It's one of those things where like themes about this are kind of explored in the show, and I'm like, I don't want to tell too much that might
Mhm,
be just historical fiction. Obviously, we don't know what this guy actually thought. So, but if there's theories.
mhm.
So they set off in May with 134 men. Of those people, the only ones who had Arctic experience were Franklin and Crozier, one lieutenant, one surgeon, and each ship had an ice master who was like the expert in navigating ice. And that,
Slay.
right?
What a
Good.
title.
I know. I'm like a lot of titles are like, ooh, master of this. And I'm like, this is a pretty sweet title
Yeah,
game you
the
got going
Ice
on here.
Master.
Ice Master. Uh, so they set sail, and then in July 26th of that year, some whalers saw the ships in Baffin Bay, just off the west coast of Greenland, waiting for better weather to keep going on, and they were never seen alive by Europeans again. Dun,
Womp
dun, dun, dun,
womp.
dun. So, what's going on here? Uh,
What a great question.
what's going on here? So these ships had actually gone out with supplies for up to 3 years because they knew that it was possible that they would get frozen into the ice and like have to pass a winter stuck in the ice.
For 3 years?
So the hope was like we'll get stuck for like a winter, but then it'll thaw and we'll get a little further, and then maybe we'll get stuck again, but then we can go a little further. So it was like it'll be totally fine. We've got 3 full years worth of supplies, so it's not an issue. Uh, but so there's also I this one of the things that I cut out is there is just a lot of weird thoughts about what the Arctic is like from British people of this period. For some, there was like, someone had been like, I tested a glacier in the Arctic and it was fresh water. So icebergs must be not salt water. What?
Sure.
What? That's certainly not right. And
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what it's like to spend a winter frozen into the ice. Uh, so during the winter, the temperatures in the Arctic can get as low as negative 54 degrees Fahrenheit at night, with a balmy negative 31 during the day. Uh,
Beautiful. Gorgeous
so
weather.
gorgeous weather, fabulous. These ships did have like some kind of like high tech heating system, so it may have been more comfortable than we might expect. But I mean, it's also it's Victorian high tech, so it's probably still pretty cold.
High tech.
Um,
They're like, we brought 3 years worth of coal. It's high
Right.
tech.
Yeah. I feel like I think there were like pipes that was like gonna supposed to circulate like steam throughout the ship. I may
Sure.
be wrong about that, but they have something. I have actually experienced negative 31 degrees actual temps during those polar vortex years we had, and it was
Hmm.
not great. And I was only ever outside long enough to like get from my car to the office,
Right.
so would not want to be living in that full time. And it is worth noting that another big issue for these guys is like when you are doing labor in the cold, you still sweat from exerting
Yeah.
yourself. And then the sweat freezes on you.
Well,
And
no, it can't because there's salt in it.
right, yeah,
If we've
no,
learned
no ice
anything from
here.
glaciers.
Totally fine. Yeah, and that's something that like obviously you see in Inuit clothing. Like gear is designed to like move the sweat away from your
Right.
body. British people were not on that tip yet, so they were like, ah, shit. Obviously, you've got the risk of frostbite. People are losing fingers and toes. There's hypothermia. And getting stuck in the ice is not just like, oh, well, I guess we're here now, but that's fine. Because despite its appearance, like ice in these circumstances is not actually stagnant. Like it could be floating around, it's constantly
Dragging you with it.
shifting. There's a lot of writing from the time that talks about like the noises of ice and that like you just hear this constant like creaking and groaning.
You groaning,
Mhm.
yeah.
People have said that it sounds like whimpering puppies, but also sometimes like gunshot when it's like cracking somewhere. And because this full landscape of ice is constantly shifting and like melting a little and reforming, there is the possibility that your ship can be crushed. Like
Right.
the ice could freeze and just smash into you. So that's not great.
Not. No.
So we were aware of all of these struggles and things that could be happening. But like we said, they were like, all right, it might take us 3 years. So people weren't necessarily concerned that they hadn't heard anything. But after 2 years with no word, John Franklin's wife, Jane, really started like agitating for people to go and figure shit out and be like,
Yeah.
can we check? Can we check though if they're frozen in there?
What if we just checked?
What if we just checked? What if we just took a peek? And the Admiralty, of course, is like, whatever, it's fine. And they were like, well, they have 3 years of supplies, so we'll wait until 1848 to send an expedition. And
We'll
I
wait
was like,
until they're completely dead, and
right,
then we'll.
not great, not great, you guys.
I guess
Eh,
though. Here's my other question though. You said 2 years with no word.
yeah.
What would the word have been? How would they have gotten word?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I
Like, there's
think
no
it
post.
totally. Yeah, so there would have been like not word from there, but it was like hope that like they would have reached where they were aiming
Mm.
to go. Like people had like sent letters ahead to China for them to be like, "Hey babe, you got here and definitely didn't die
Great
in the
job.
ice. Love it. Good. Well done."
You're
Uh
so brave and smart. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
sad.
it is sad. And so that this became like this was a big story in the public because it was this big exciting expedition and now it's a mystery. And
Sure.
they offered like a significant reward for aiding in the rescue. People are searching. There are all sorts of like political cartoons. There was a song about Jane Franklin. It was called like Lady Franklin's Lament, about her being like, save my husband. Finally, in 1854, several years later, we have a dude named John Ray, who is a very experienced Arctic guy. And in a fun twist for the time, he is someone who like will actually spend time living with and traveling with local people while he's surveying the
Wow.
area and like doing hunting. And he's got this great tactic for getting information in which he actually talks to native
Tr-
people
treats
and
people with respect. Yeah.
and listens to what they tell him,
Wow. So
because
interesting.
he asks about, he's like, hey, how about this? And they're like, oh yeah, you mean all those white guys who starved? Like, we have some of their stuff. And showed him items that were linked back to the expedition. um, Obviously, at the time of this sailing, they didn't know this, but the area on King William Island, where we now know that the expedition ended up, was an area that even like the local Inuit really did not go. And they were like, this is like a
Hmm.
super inhospitable area. There's not really a lot of hunting here. So it was just in general bad times.
Like, hey,
Like,
if anybody had asked us, we would have said, hey, don't do that.
right, exactly. So he writes a report for the Admiralty and was like, hey, this is what the Inuit told me happened. And in this report, he mentions the fact that he was told that the expedition had resorted to cannibalism, as
Yeah.
will happen. But this report is published in the Times when it wasn't supposed to be, and
Ew.
people start having lots of feelings. And guess who enters the fray, Midge? It's someone that we hate.
Oh no, that could be so many
It's
people.
true.
I don't know.
It's Charles fucking Dickens.
Is it? I was gonna say that, but I was like,
It,
surely not. What would
oh
he have to do
yeah.
with this?
It's
The two
Charles
people that jumped to my brain were P.T. Barnum and Charles Dickens.
Good guesses. You were correct. It was in fact Charles Dickens. So
Now, how did he get himself mixed up in all this?
right. So it is believed that he was pushed. So he was already like, so he was actually like very into like Arctic expedition, and he was like, this is so
Okay.
brave and exciting. And it is believed that he was maybe pushed by Jane Franklin to do this to
Mm.
protect her husband's reputation. But he rolls up and has a whole series of articles that are like, wow, maybe horrible savages would do cannibalism, but never good
Oh,
Christian
yeah.
Englishmen. Gross. And just absolutely scorches John Ray in the press and like does everything he can to discredit him, as we have learned is part of the Dickens playbook.
Yeah, him and
Uh,
Rufus Griswold, man.
right?
Getting together, being
In
horrible.
together being horrible, and so he also like ended up helping produce this like play that is all super cheesy and has a whole like, but of course we would never do anything un-English and terrible. Spoiler alert, obviously they definitely did do cannibalism. There is
Well, yeah.
like, what are you gonna do, my
What do
man?
you yeah.
What are you going to do? Also, okay, this isn't even in my notes, but fun fact, the winter of 1848, where we think probably everybody died, is the same winter of the Donner Party.
Oh,
It was a really intense winter. And so
cannibalism was in.
it caused a lot of problems for everybody.
Sure, sure.
So there you go. So at this point, the Admiralty is basically like, yeah, all right, these people are dead. Oh well. Jane Franklin is not satisfied and
Of
uses
course.
all of her social influence, letter writing, and raises the funds to send another search party. And it is actually this party that discovers the only primary source that we have, which kind of lets us know very rough details of what happened.
Did they find
Uh,
a captain's log?
right. So not the cap. They were looking very intensely for captain's logs and did not find them. But they
Aw, I
found
love a
what
captain's
I
log.
know. I know. But they found what is referred to as the Victory Point Note. So at this time, and I think still today, like explorers and hikers will build like little piles of stones to
Mhm.
like mark their path, and it was common to like leave like messages in there like
Oh,
for
okay.
like the next person who kind of comes along. So,
Geocaching.
right, it was basically geocaching, and obviously in the Arctic not a lot of people are coming along.
Passing through, yeah.
Not a whole lot of passing
Not
through.
even the indigenous people.
Nope.
Yeah.
So this note is written on like a standard Admiralty form that was first filled out in May 1847, which does say like, "Yep, we got frozen in. We're stuck in the ice by Beechy Island. The ice hadn't melted when winter ended, but like we're chilling, basically." And then this note must have been retrieved, and because additional writing was added in the margins in April of 1848, that was like, hey, shit got
It's not
real.
great.
John Franklin died. We're cruisers in charge. We're preparing to abandon the ships and try and like walk for help and rescue.
Jeez.
So that is the last that we are aware of these guys. So over the years, relics and remains continue to be found along this area, including 3 bodies buried on Beechy Island. We've got some ice mummies, like bog bodies, but cold. I
Whoa.
actually, I kind of was like, maybe I'll do a whole episode on ice mummies. So I
I
didn't
wish you
mention it
would.
today. So stay tuned for ice mummies. In the 1980s and 90s, there's another big push of archaeology and to like use modern technology to continue to investigate. They continued finding a lot of stuff. And then all the way in 2014, they
Oh, wow.
find Erebus, and in 2016 they find the wreck of Terror. So it's extra crazy because this like History Channel documentary I watched about this is from before this. So it's
Oh,
actually
wow.
really cool because it ends with all these historians being like, well, we've been searching for 150 years and like I do believe that we'll find them one day. And now they have.
Whoa.
They are there and found. Since then, over 350 artifacts have been brought up from the ships, but obviously it is an incredibly delicate site, and people have to dive to retrieve things. There is a lot of analysis and research actively going on, and just in September of last year, they were able to use family genealogy to identify the remains of our boy, James Fitzjames.
James Fitzjames.
James Fitzjames, one of our main dudes. They did, in fact, identify a jawbone as his. So that is pretty cool. So if you
And
have
that was
been
on the ship?
no, so that had been found previously
Oh, okay.
in like the remains, but it was just like whose jawbone is this?
Mm.
Who's to say? So they did identify it, and yeah, there's just lots of feelings. So if you're like, this is intriguing. I love frozen misery. I also love themes of imperial hubris and colonization, but maybe I would like a dash of supernatural horror. You should check out the TV show The Terror.
So then was the finding of the wreck of the Terror, was that did the show come out shortly after
Yeah, so
that
it
was
it
discovered?
did come out after, but it was kind of all they found it right before they started filming. So like it
Oh,
was
so they had already, like, written it and
yeah, yeah.
everything.
So this
Wow,
is
okay.
based on a 2007 novel that is
Okay.
about the that was inspired by the expedition. So like this I feel like it's not so much in the US, but this expedition is like very much a big Canadian thing. Like it's
Sure.
the and obviously, I mean, there's the British connection, but like because the wrecks and stuff are in what is now Canada, people
Mhm.
are like, yeah, we're into this. So yeah, this is a Dan Simmons novel from 2007, and so the show is based on that 10-episode series. Amazing cast. It is so thematically detailed, and like the historic detailing is just top notch. So good. They have a bunch of stuff where it's like mittens that are like inspired by like actual mittens that were found from people and stuff. So it is really good. Like many great shows, it was not like well promoted when it first came out, but ended up building a lot of buzz kind of in the aftermath. And it has had a renaissance because it went up on Netflix this past
Oh,
summer.
okay.
And that is when I watched it, even though I've known this whole time that it existed and that I should watch it because
Sure. Sometimes it
obviously I love
yeah.
all these things. But you gotta wait till the right moment sometimes. And my brain was like, this is the moment. So it was actually super crazy for me because I like watched the show, was like, oh man, this is so interesting. I gotta keep reading and like kind of refresh my memory on this. And then like 2 months later, they were like, we've identified one of these main guys who is like a central character in the show. So
Sure.
I was like, oh man, it's all
It's all
happening.
happening.
It's all happening right now, you guys. Uh,
History is now.
History is now. Yeah, it is a fascinating and tragic historic event, but it's just I don't know. I've definitely been intrigued based on this to like continue looking into like other polar expedition and
Yeah.
exploration type stuff, which is super interesting. And it's so crazy to me to like I would not want to go to the Arctic now, like
Dude,
in
I was thinking
with
when you were
all
talking
of
about with them saying, like, "We're getting ready to abandon the boats and walk." We had, what, 12 to 14 inches of snow in Kansas City this past
yeah.
weekend, and I was like, "Oh, I would have died immediately."
Yeah,
Like, in
yeah.
any kind of scenario where this was just, like, you had to, what, take a, like, covered wagon through this? Like, what? I natural selected immediately.
Right? And like they were like,
People
"Oh,
in Missouri
well."
were stranded on the highway for, like, 8
Yep.
hours with cars, with
I
with
know.
with snowplows and modern technology. We're just
Right?
stranded.
And they're just like,
What?
"Nah, you're gonna walk in your like British Navy
Pea coat. Yeah,
outfit."
your wool pea coat
Like, I mean,
and your
obviously they had some winter gear, but like not
and
the
your
not
snack
the
boots
not the winter gear that is required for
your
surviving the Arctic.
fucking boot by the foot for your snack pack. I also have to bring up, because now I'm like, maybe I should do an episode on this, because obviously I know we have a lot of listeners in Wisconsin. I don't know if that translates to Kansas City. I don't know if I have people from Missouri that listen.
Mhm.
But do you know about Steamboat Arabia?
I do not.
Do you know what this is? Okay, so if you're from Kansas City and you grew up here, that's like the field trip you go on. That's like how you were saying this disaster is like a big thing in
Yeah.
Canada. Steamboat Arabia is like Casey's big thing. there was a steamboat that sank to the bottom of the Missouri River in 1856,
Ooh.
and then they pulled it up and it was like a time capsule.
Oh, that's
Um,
rad. Yeah.
yeah, and you could like go to the museum. It was a whole big thing. So I probably went to Steamboat Arabia 500 times between first and sixth grade. Like it's just like
Yes.
what where you go. It's one of the only like big history museum things we have here. Um, and so I'm like, oh, maybe I should do an episode
You
about the steamboat.
should, you should. It is so crazy, like, just looking like, I was watching footage from, like, going through, like, the wrecks underwater and just, like, the porcelain, like, the china is perfectly intact, just
Wild.
sitting there and stuff like that. It's so crazy, and there's also since I went through this fast, I cut this out. There's extra drama because for a long time people are like, "What killed these guys?"
Sure.
Question mark, question mark. And for a long time, from the 80s, they did some analysis of the Beachy Island bodies and believed that maybe it was lead poisoning. So
I
there was
literally was gonna say, was it lead?
truly. Well, because they're like, oh, like they had these tinned foods and they were like not made properly, and it was probably the Goldner's tins that killed them. But nowadays, people are actually like, maybe not, because they actually they were on the same path as you in your thought, Midge, because they were like, you guys, sure, these guys have a lot of lead in them, but like is it more lead than the average
The
person
average
of the
Victorian,
time?
right?
They were like, they were getting a lot of lead from kind of all quarters.
Yeah.
So you can't
It's literally a
necessarily
miracle that humans survived past that time period.
truly.
Everything had like lead, radium,
Yep.
arsenic,
Yep.
like
Everything
just
had crazy
poison from
amounts of
every
lead.
angle.
Yep. So now it sounds like people are kind of thinking that, I mean, as you could guess, like just kind of standard malnutrition, and the fact that
Being an ice for a year,
being in
yeah.
ice for a year, being malnourished does make you more susceptible to other things. Obviously, scurvy is a
Mhm.
possibility on these boats. So there it sounds like there's some evidence that it was not the tin's fault. It
I'm
was
also like, wouldn't a better question be like, what didn't kill these
right.
guys?
That's what I was gonna say.
The
Were
whole
people
what do you mean?
as I was reading some of these things where they were like, "Oh, the mystery. How did they die?" And I'm like, "They were frozen in the Arctic in 1847. Like, what do you think was going to happen?" Like they
Yeah,
were
like
like, "We're going to walk." They walked and they did not get
and they
anywhere.
didn't make
So,
it. Yeah.
unfortunately,
What about everything about the entire situation is
yeah.
what killed
It's
them?
like, I think that maybe going there killed
Yeah,
them.
making the decision to leave. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I highly recommend The Terror to any of our friends out there who like to watch something that's a little spooky and a little historical. Very good. And if you are otherwise interested, that Arctic Tomb doc is pretty fun. It's like a 90s History Channel special and it's up on YouTube. So it's fun to watch, although it did make me want to shake some of these people who still there was a historian on there where the anthropologist was like, well, the cut marks on the bones is consistent with cannibalism. And this dude was like, I don't think it's cannibalism. It sounds more like they were attacked. And I'm like,
Attacked by
seriously? You're
yeah.
gonna be like, oh, scary natives attacked these men in the middle of
Yeah.
the Arctic where they didn't even want to go? Like,
Yeah.
gross. Big gross. But other than that, it is a fun and interesting documentary.
Well, this is not something I would have looked into on my own accord. So once again, you've brought me something weird and
Yay!
delightful.
I'm glad. Yes, this is one that has definitely like captured my interest right now. I have already read a book about a different an Antarctic expedition actually, and we'll probably continue to read more. So if you guys like frozen content, let me know because I could tell you more stuff about that. But if you did enjoy this episode, you could let the people know and leave us a review on your podcast app of choice. We very much appreciate all of our reviews, and I do believe Midge has one to share today.
I do. This one is from Cozy Cottage Witch. It is a 5-star review titled Spooktacular with
Ooh.
ghost emoji, bat emoji, spider emoji, all my favorite things. My two favorite ghouls. I found your podcast just recently and have been binge listening to all the episodes. Thank you so much. I just love the history you bring to your show. I have learned so much. Great laughs as well. Thanks for keeping it creepy. Vampire emoji, heart emoji. Love from Wisconsin.
Hey! Awesome. Thank you. Another spooky Wisconsinite. Love it.
Love that.
Love that for me.
She's building an army.
Yes.
She's building a polar expedition.
We're gonna go. Let's head north, you guys. All right. If you would like to follow along and keep up with the pod, you can find us on Instagram. We are at Ghouls Night in Pod, and you can find myself at Penny Snark.
You can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time,
Good.
goodbye.